Hello and welcome to the panel on scaling action on sustainability amid COVID-19. This is our first full panel session for the Sustainability Summit, and I'm joined by three excellent panelists from three very interesting companies. Virginie Elias, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Procter & Gamble, Kelly Goddard, Senior Vice President for Sustainability at BP, and Otto Schacht, Executive Vice President of Global Sea Logistics at Kuehne & Nagel International. So we have a range of industries, very global industries, and also ones that have ambitious sustainability plans. In fact, it struck me in reading about all three of them that 2030 seems to be a target, an important target date for all of you. And this is the date for goals, a 10-year horizon for trying to achieve extremely ambitious aims on sustainability. So I'm going to start perhaps by going around each of you and asking you about what those targets are for 2030. And since the whole point of this panel is to really talk about how you get change at scale on sustainability, I'd like to explore that in each case. How have you drawn up these plans? How do you make sure that they're really realistic and achievable? What difference will they make in practice? What lessons can we learn from this whole process? And I also want, as the title of the panel suggests, to explore how all this works at a time of COVID when there are all sorts of pressures on businesses around the world. How is that playing into the sustainability agenda, and how is it affecting these plans? So, Virginie, if I could go to you first, and P&G. So 2030, you want you have a plan called Ambition 2030. So describe that ambition for us. What does it mean in practice?
Yes, absolutely, Daniel. Actually, this year we are sunsetting first our 2020 goals, and we are happy to say that we will hit 15 of the 16 goals that we had for 2020. But actually, 2 years ago, we started and we launched our 2030 goals in the spirit of acceleration. We didn't wait for this year to launch Ambition 2030. And the overall ambition is to enable and inspire positive impacts across our supply chain, our brands, our employees, and what we call society, which are those goals that are too big for us alone to achieve. And so I'll hit very quickly on brands and society, especially. Brands, for a company which invented brand management almost 100 years ago, we are now reinventing brands, and that's a big deal. We are making sustainability an integral part of how we build our brands, and we have a process. We are going to report externally our progress as of this year. Each of our leadership brands need to define what is their 2030 North Star, and it needs to be a very bold social or environmental commitment that they will bring to life consistently with tangible acts. And I can give you a few examples later on. So that's how we do it through our brands. And we touch 5 billion people around the world. So this can have an impact, when we enable people to do small change at home, just turning the dial to 30 on their washing machine or skipping the rinse when they do their dishes, multiply by 5 billion people around the world, that has an impact. And then what we call society are those goals that are need to be solved and achieved through collaboration. And so we have 3. One is on plastic waste. And it's about the aspiration here is that we will find solutions so that no P&G packaging will find its way to the ocean. This is a bold aspiration, and it's underlined by very specific strategy from sustainable design all the way to enabling governments to build their waste management infrastructure in Southeast Asia, for instance. Our second goal is on water. 70% of our business needs water for our product to be used, whether you shave wash your hair or do your dishes, you need water. And so water is extremely important for us. And we know that it's a very, very scarce resource. So we have a goal here to protect and return water in what we've defined as our 18 priority basins. And the third goal is on climate, and we just announced our climate commitment, which is to be carbon neutral for the decade by 2030 in our operation. And we do that through a combination of reducing our own emission and investing in nature-based solutions for the emissions that we cannot reduce.
Okay, so these are clearly, ambitious targets, but I think it would help. You mentioned you could give some examples. I really think it helps to say in concrete terms, what actually changes through this plan? How does a product, for example, change,
Yes.
or in terms of your plastic, yes, material packaging?
Absolutely.
What sort of investments are needed to bring this about?
Yes. In order for us to have the greatest impact, we always start with the science. And so on each of our products, we have a very clear what we call life cycle analysis, which looks at all the impact of this product from cradle to grave, from the extraction of raw material to make the product all the way down to disposal. And so we do that product by product. So for instance, on detergent, on Ariel, 60% of the carbon footprint is the in-use phase. It's when people choose the temperature of their washing machine, and you go from 40 degrees to 30 degrees, you already save, in the UK, for instance, 57% of the energy, And today, there are still the majority of people wash at 40. So here is a very simple way, to encourage people to wash in colder water because Ariel allows to. It has been designed to wash in cold. And so we partner with WWF, for instance, for Earth Hour, and for each pledge of consumers who say they will turn from 40 to 30, we give donation to WWF. So those are very concrete things. And, you can make a difference. Back in 2002, only 4% of people wash at 30 degrees, and now it's for over 40%. So, and multiply by the number of people, it has a clear impact.
Do you have an overall estimate of the? Yes, carry on. Do carry on with plastics, yes.
So plastic is obviously a very important topic. We are a big user of plastic, single-use plastic. Plastic in and of itself not being the enemy, but what is the waste of plastic, obviously, and all the plastic that especially leaks into the environment. And so on plastic, the priority is to use less. And so we have a goal to reduce by 50% our use of virgin petroleum plastic. You do that through either using much less plastic in your packaging or replacing virgin plastic with recycled plastic, for instance. It's easy to say it like this, but there are many complications around all this. I mean, the first thing is that there is not enough recycled plastic. Most companies, you must have seen, have very ambitious goals on using recycled plastic. There is just not enough supply. And we see this as our own responsibility to enable this acceleration of the circular economy. And for instance, what we do, we need to do it through innovation. And recently, P&G has been leading an effort started with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in the UK, which is called Holy Grail, which is a fantastic innovation that turns packaging into intelligent packaging with digital watermark, which allows intelligent sorting, which increases the quality and the quantity of recycled plastic. So that's a very tangible way that we show to accelerate the development of circular economy. And just the last one on this whole plastic issue is at the very end, you can make your packaging recyclable, but if there is no infrastructure to recycle, that's a new point. And we know that in many regions, there is a lack of infrastructure. 60% of the plastic that leaks into the ocean comes from a mismanaged or non-managed waste in Southeast Asia in particular. And so this is why we created with 50 other companies the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which has on one of the objectives to recover plastic, to create value from plastic waste, and to work with the local government on creating a waste management infrastructure as one of the things that the Alliance is doing.
Well, it's fascinating. And I think one of the things that emerges from that is, it's not by you alone. It's a question of partnerships and working with not only other organizations and consumers, but also creating in
Our
some
own
cases the
competitors,
possibility
you know?
to be what you, yeah, and your own competitors. So
Yes.
we'll come back to this, I'm sure, but let's move on to Kelly Goddard and BP. Now BP obviously has a long history, starting with John Brown to go beyond petroleum, but it's also had a troubled history environmentally, and now it's going beyond itself almost in its targets, to oil and gas strategy to move to net zero, which in the oil and gas field seems almost unthinkable. Kelly, tell us what this 2030 target is and how you plan to achieve it.
Sure, thanks, Daniel, and it's great to be here with you and Virginie and Otto today to discuss such a important topic. And as you know, it's moving quite quickly. For us, really, the journey has started this year. In February, as you say, we launched our net zero ambition, and that's to get to net zero by 2050 or sooner, and to help the world get to net zero. And we have 10 aims underneath that ambition to achieve both of those, or to aim to achieve both of those. We've spent the year really looking at that strategy and developing it. And in August, we came back with 2025 targets and 2030 aims, and how we intend to deliver those and scale them. And I'll just go through a few of those, and we can elaborate, as you'd like. For 2030, we aim to have developed 50 gigawatts of renewable generating capacity. That's a 20-fold increase from where we are today. We also aim to increase our EV charging points to 7,000. That's a 10-fold increase from where we are today. We aim to partner with 15 cities and 3 industries to help those areas achieve their net zero goals, and we are in action already on that, announcing partnerships with the cities of Aberdeen and Houston as well. We will also intend to increase our investment in renewables, including a $5 billion investment a year in new energy. So we believe that this is a holistic strategy. It takes us from being an international oil company to an integrated energy company, which we believe is a significant pivot. We also understand the need to look at this holistically with a sustainability lens. So that's why recently we've also launched our new sustainability frame, and that includes our net zero ambition, but it also includes wider environmental and social aspects as well. And we are in action in several of those, including in biodiversity. We've recently launched some aims and a commitment around biodiversity. I think what Virginie said rings true for us as well. A key part of this is about collaboration. It's about partnership. And we have entered into several partnerships already, including with Equinor and our first offshore wind deal. And that's really exciting. But now it is about execution. We have a clear direction. We have a hugely energized organization. And for us, it's really about taking the action that's already underway, and then scaling it to deliver against our 2025 targets and our 2030 aims.
So I guess 2 questions immediately occur for that. First is the long term. So I suppose looking ahead, the long term vision of this, and for a energy company like BP, does it really mean getting out of hydrocarbons? Is that what you're really saying, and moving entirely into both renewables and energy services, or is it something different than that? Do you move away from hydrocarbons entirely, or do you compensate for the hydrocarbons in other ways through other energy saving?
We've been clear that hydrocarbons is a key part of our strategy, and but we will produce less over time, clearly, and we will use that investment to really fund the $5 billion in new energy sources. So I think it's clear that it will remain a key part of our portfolio. We will have a resilient hydrocarbon business as part of the business, but we will also look to scale in several different different parts of the energy transition.
And so that how does the maths work out then to get to net zero when you still have a big chunk in hydrocarbons? That's the thing I struggle to get into my head around.
So, I think it's a great question, and one we're asked a lot. I think it's why we have a very diversified and holistic strategy. So we have an overall net zero ambition. Underneath that, there are several aims. Some for reducing emissions in our own operations, and as well as helping the world get to zero. So in terms of the maths working out, we do have a portfolio of actually taking emissions out of our options, as well as scaling other businesses such as CCUS, for example, which would capture emissions, and then looking at moving that into alternative areas such as of hydrogen, and other areas such as offshore wind. So it's about reducing our emissions, it's about scaling technologies such as CCUS, and it's about moving into other areas such as hydrogen and wind.
Okay, and I wanted to somewhat looking back into the past. So why should we now believe, you said this really started now, this new program, but BP's been on about this for a long time, as I mentioned at the beginning. Why is this different from before? And isn't there a danger that in speaking up about this now and setting such targets, you set yourself up for a fall, which to some extent is what happened in the past?
So I think where we are now is we recognize that there is a need to change. What we deliver suspects us to deliver differently. And, that's really important. We also really change our employees, and our organization wants us to. And increasingly, investors are asking us to do this and informing us through initiatives to support that transition. So I think in this case, we as you say, we've been here, we've had activities in the past, we have a track record, we've also had accidents, and I'm the first to recognize those as well. But at this point, we really want to recognize the need to change at this point. We recognize the immense amount of capability and skills we bring from our existing oil and gas business in terms of large scale projects. We recognize that our amazing partners, and will increase those partners to move into it. So it's, to us, the time is absolutely the right time to do this now, and actually the imperative to do it is now as well.
Okay, let's turn to Otto and Kuehne + Nagel, which is a giant logistics and shipping company, and shipping was responsible for, I think it's about 2.5% of global emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So it's an industry that is obviously under serious focus, and perhaps hasn't been the quickest, shall we say, putting it charitably, to get its act together in this. But I know you personally have been an evangelist, so tell us what Kuehne + Nagel are doing in the 2030 targets that you have.
Very good. Thank you, Daniel. Also, hello to Virginia and Kelly. Happy to be here in this seminar. First of all, I have to clarify one thing. We are a major provider, logistics provider, but we do not own any assets. So we do not own any planes. We do not own any vessels. So we organize transports. And so we are, and I come to this in a second. We are, since many, many years, we were measuring our CO2 footprint internally. We had a sustainability program since 12 years. And we came to, 2 years ago to the conclusion we have to do more about this. So we set ourselves very clear targets for especially scope 1 and 2, which, as we are not a production company, as we do not have any real assets except our warehouses, so much easier than an oil company or a consumer company, which has production facilities. And we then decided last year to, as of this year, to be 2020 to be carbon neutral under scope 1 and 2. So we are offsetting our remaining unavoidable emissions. We try to reduce them as much as possible, but as we operate in about 130 countries worldwide, and in some countries we cannot yet buy renewable energy, so there's still CO2 left. which this year is about 300,000 tons, and that we will offset. So as of this year, and we are investing into nature-based solutions in Africa, in South America. And
can I just, it would be helpful just for the, can I just ask to be a bit precise about how you define those? What's the scope of those emissions? Because there's often in this measurement a question of whether it's your direct operations of your own company, or whether it's, you know, the whole value chain or the whole business that you set in motion through the products and services that you move around.
No, that's a very good question. So we talk about our own emissions, and this is basically the energy we use in our buildings, in all warehouses, and on the few trucks which we operate ourselves. But the majority of our emissions is under Scope 3, which we are not directly responsible for. So that's the responsibility of shipping lines, airlines, trucking companies. Yeah. And to just put this in perspective, we as a company have 300,000 tons under Scope 1 and 2, which we control directly, and we have about 19 million tons which are coming from the vessels, from the airplanes, etc.
So when we talk about scalability, you know, it's really that Scope 3 that we're really talking about, rather than your direct operations yourself.
Exactly. And we're probably one of the first companies who are tackling Scope 3. So we set ourselves a very extreme ambitious target that by 2030 we want to neutralize all Scope 3 carbon emissions together with our customers. That means we reduce wherever we can by switching from certain vessels to other vessels, because we sit on very good data on CO2 emissions by planes, by shipping lines, etc. So we can really manage CO2 far better, and that's what we're actually selling. And the remaining emissions, till there will be new technology, and we'll talk about that later, and that will probably last another 20 to 30 years till shipping lines are ready to operate vessels or airplanes with non-carbon fuels. Till then, till 2030, we want to offset all those emissions. So by 2030, we have a clear target that the present 20 million tons of CO2 under Scope 3 will be eliminated.
Well, let's talk a little bit about technology. I mean, there seem to me to be two technologies here that are crucial. One that can help immediately, and one is longer term. The longer term one that you just mentioned is new carbon neutral fuels that might transition to the shipping industry might transition to, but that is not a quick process. And obviously, it's not just the fuels that need to be produced, but the ships need to be built, and that's clearly going to take a long time. But do talk about that in a bit. But the immediate technology seems to me to be data and digital technology, which presumably is a huge driver of these changes for you. And how are you applying that? And when it comes to scalability, where can data play the biggest role?
The interesting thing is we started to collect a lot of data, CO2 emissions in my business field for sea freight from shipping lines. And what we found already a couple of years ago, that the difference between two different vessels can be huge. It can be between up to 300% different. So you might move a container for Procter & Gamble, for BP, from one port to another port, and you think it's the same vessel, but the difference is 300%. And this transparency, which we have now created, which we are now making available to our customers, that's already the first step where we can help people to reduce their CO2 footprint tremendously without changing a lot, by just switching from one vessel to another vessel. So that's the first step. Second step is there is now even cleaner vessels. Right now, the first carriers are building LNG vessels, and LNG has about a 20% lower CO2 emission than the normal fuel. But it's also only a bridging technology, because in the end, it's still quite a bit of CO2 being emitted, but it's the first step. So we are starting also there through data, steering cargo onto these type of vessels.
And how receptive are your customers, your partners, to this sort of push? Are you finding you're pushing at an open door, or are you finding resistance?
No, I would say the good news is that since the last 12, 18 months, and even in these COVID times, it has not really changed. People are much more receptive to this. First of all, by having better visibility on these various emissions, it's helping them. It might be a little more costly because you switch from one service to another service, and then we have to convince our shippers that this will cost a little more because that vessel might be a little more expensive. But there is not a big gap. We are now starting, that is much more expensive. We are starting to sell biofuel options. And that's what we're discussing with shipping lines and oil companies. And I don't know, I think BP is also looking into it as far as I understand. That is quite a bit more expensive. We hope that in the next coming years, more people go for this. And I would say climate change, if we want to have a major impact, it will not come from free. It will cost money. And the biofuel is one example where we know you talk easily 40-50% more cost per container, which you move around the world. But that would be then straight away carbon neutral. So, but there is not enough carbon biofuel available to propel all vessels worldwide right now. So it's again an interim solution till we get to ammonia, methanol, hydrogen, etc. So that will come. But we have this. The next 20, 30 years will be the important ones. How do we reach that time till we have, let's say, 100% non-carbon propulsion systems available?
So I think you raise a very interesting point, which is that it doesn't come for free. There are, and therefore there are hard arguments to make, tough sales to make, to persuade both presumably your own decision makers and your partners to pay the price, as it were, for ambitious sustainability targets. And I think that is also the case when it comes to COVID. There are competing pressures to build back better, in the phrase that's become a bit of a cliche already, I think, from COVID, but also to get the economy moving again, come what may. So perhaps I could go, Virginie, back to you on the COVID question. How is this playing into P&G's calculations, and does it accelerate or does it hinder sustainability efforts and the ambitions of sustainability that you were outlining at the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question, Daniel. You know, actually, if there is one silver liner of COVID, is that there is a greater now recognition that humanitarian health and planetary health are very closely interlinked. You know, I mean, we have 71% of people who are saying that the climate crisis is as serious as the COVID crisis. And I think, you know, one good thing is that people have now realized that we need to protect nature so that nature can protect us. And this is why, you know, and Otto is doing that as well. Investment in nature-based solution is actually a very smart investment. I mean, it's 1/3 of the climate solutions. So it's something that we are doing, others are doing, and it's the right thing to do. Now, in terms of, you know, for us and our consumers, when we look at what happened, like especially during the lockdown, you know, people were more at home. We've seen an increase of water usage by 50%, energy usage by 30%, plastic usage by 20%. And so what happened is that people have realized their own personal contribution to the depletion of resources. And all our consumer indicators show that they are now more than ever committed to be more health conscious and more environmentally conscious. So to answer your question, COVID has been a great accelerator. Externally, yes, for our consumers, they are now much more committed, you know, to do the right choice for the planet, and internally as well, because we've seen that, you know, our retailers are asking for more. This is, I mean, it was a bit counterintuitive, but what we are saying is all the indicators are positive in terms of we want to accelerate responsible consumption, and this is why in everything we talk now, we need to make sure that we engage people, because, you know, we need to touch lifestyle. This is the right moment to do it, and people are ready for it.
But one also reads that, you know, it's surprising, it's eye-popping what reductions in emissions, for example, and consumption of materials there were under the pandemic. But then it climbs back up again, also with eye-popping speed. So do you think that this change is going to be a permanent change, or is it just, it snaps back to consumption as it were before, as people are desperate to return to whatever normality is these days?
No, I think there will be something that will be permanent. Obviously, the dolphin in Venice and all this, were temporary, and it was all about stopping, the industry, which is not a sustainable state. So that's not what we are looking for. But in terms of people's realization, and the leaders as well, realization that we cannot continue like before, that we need not just to build back better, but to build forward better, because it's like we need to create a different future. I think there is a great traction from citizens, from government, from business, to accelerate the speed and the scale, because that's really what's needed now. I mean, we have most of the solution. We need now to do it at scale, and we need to do it in a way that is cross-sector, pre-competitive, and system transformative. So that's really what's needed to build.
Kelly Goddard, you're nodding, so presumably similar thoughts for BP. But at the same time, isn't the world desperate to get moving again, to burn up all the fuels again, and get back to some sort of busy economic activity?
Well, I would say that what Virginie said really resonates as well. It does accelerate it for us, and we launched our new ambition in February, and then just the following months we saw the impacts of COVID, and many people similar to you, Daniel, asked, does this mean that is this gonna weaken your commitment? Is this gonna delay your net zero ambition or your wider purpose that we set out? And similar to Virginie, we said no, this reinforces it, this accelerates it, and it's because having a wider purpose is no longer a nice to have. COVID straight away, we're all society, and we all need to play our part. And I think we've definitely seen that in BP, and hence why we continued to develop our strategy throughout the year, which we announced in August. And I think, to your point, there's a real opportunity here to support economic recovery from COVID-19. We've seen that governments are preparing to spend about $1.7 trillion on green stimulus packages. So it's really where the two, climate change, COVID-19, the government responses are converging, and it's a huge opportunity to, as you say, build back better, but build back green as well, in transport and infrastructure towards green mobility. Now, it's important that it's not just the spending that's not a cure-all, because the huge sums of money will be focused in developed countries. So it's also important to recognize the need to continue focusing on decarbonization of the emerging economies as we go. And that's why it's important to look at this through a full sustainability lens and recognize, recognize the differences there. So I do think it has accelerated. I think it's a huge opportunity with the stimulus packages coming to build back greener, and that there was even a report yesterday, World Economic Forum, saying that 86 or 87% of the people surveyed want a more equitable and sustainable world coming out of it. So I think it's just a really big opportunity that we should really maximize as we come, both governments and the private sectors, as we come out of COVID, hopefully sometime in the near future.
Otto, presumably one of the impacts of COVID that you're seeing is changes in supply chains. Company after company is rethinking where to source supplies from, and securing supplies, perhaps in many cases closer to home. Is that do you see that as something that is going to have a big impact over time as well?
Yes, we started to see this already since a while. We saw this already after the financial crisis, that companies started to move production closer to home. But we believe that global trade, and we predominantly look at containerized trade, so products which move in containers, manufactured products. Globalization will not stop because of COVID. The world population is growing. We will see big movements into Africa because of growing populations into those countries. We foresee more, and the good news was, and I think both Kelly and Virginie mentioned it, there is actually the COVID situation has accelerated this whole idea we have to do something about the climate. So we see talking to customers now, doing something on sustainable supply chains is more receptive than a year or 2 years ago. So that's the positive news. I think the pressure from governments, that's why I also personally, we support carbon taxes, because only that forces industry to change, to do something about it. Because transportation and Kelly, probably I would always say oil is too cheap because it does not force change, because other fuels which are far more expensive, and that's why we have to make it more expensive through carbon taxing. That forces the industry to change. But the overall volumes, we are interesting enough now, August, September, we are more or less, we estimate world trade in containerized is back at last year's volumes. Mm-hmm. So we saw a major shift that people, of course, could not spend so much on travel, vacation. So if you work today for an airline or you work in the tourism business, of course, we know all the problems we see there, empty hotels in Spain, in Paris, in London, wherever. But people spend product, and I think Virginia was mentioning it, the Procter & Gamble's and all these big companies, they sell more product because people stay at home. And actually, we made a calculation, you save more CO2 even if people buy more for something which they use at home instead of flying, going somewhere. Business travel will be, in my view, heavily impacted. We will never go back to the business travel which we had before. And you see it when you talk to the airlines. They think they will be earliest in 5-6 years back at the levels where, if at all, where they were before COVID. So no, overall, I think COVID has accelerated this whole subject, and that's the good news. And if you look at the political landscape, of course, we see the rise of the Green parties. France, during the COVID, had elections, and in a lot of towns, Green mayors were elected. We will have next year elections here in Germany. And one thing is for sure, the Green Party will make big steps forward.
I think that's a good, perhaps we have rather little time left, so we just 3 minutes, and I'd like to get another thought from all of you. And perhaps this political question is a place to go, because you've talked, all of you, about relations with your customers and with your partners. But one thing that COVID does is change the political environment, and a lot of pressure, and of course governments now with huge debts and huge leverage over the economy is going to be very important. So what do you think the role of big companies such as yours with government will be, your partnership with government, if you like, to change the environment for sustainability? Is there something in your industry that government can do to make sure that these sustainability goals, targets, aims are actually met? Virginie, first to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, partnership with government is going to be increasingly important. I mean, we see the EU Green Deal. We need to work together for enabling policies. I mean, covering all the topic I mentioned: climate, plastic waste, water. I mean, we have a project right now which is called the 50-liter home, which is how do you make people live well with 50 liters per person per day, as opposed to 150 or 500 that they use today. For this, we need new regulation. We need to invent a new regulation so that we can build those homes. Same thing on plastic waste. You know, we have a big diaper business, and we have a technology to recycle diapers, actually. But we need enabling technology, regulation for this to happen. You know, so on every single topic, we need to collaborate with government to be able to innovate so that we can actually drive the circular economy and responsible consumption.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yes, agree with that. We're seeing more and more cities announce their climate ambitions and develop climate action plans. We're seeing more and more countries do that too, and most recently in China to be carbon neutral by 2060. So I think the first step is setting targets, and both in the private sector and companies, and then working together to meet those targets and you know, in the way that's appropriate to do so. So I think collaboration is huge. similar to auto, we support, carbon pricing. We support, regulation on areas such as methane, and that may be surprising to some, but we want to see it too. And I think that is the way that we can work with governments to support both the targets, each other's targets, and robust policies.
Otto, you want more taxes on oil?
I think what we have to, and I think the collaboration, we have to do as the private business, we have to do our own things, but we have to collaborate with governments and have to do things together. Give you one example, the German government started an alliance called Alliance for Climate and Development, which was in the beginning a pure German alliance where private business is supporting investing into nature-based solutions as an interim solution. They just told us now they want to expand this. It should become a global alliance. And so we are getting support from them. We are supporting them in this respect. So I think this is the way to go. We can't do it. Private business we cannot do it alone, but politics cannot do it either. I told some people at Fridays for Future, you should talk also more to private businesses and not only to governments, because we both have a huge influence on this.
Well, Otto Schach, Kelly Goddard, Virginie Elias, thank you very much indeed. There's lots to take away from what you've said, both on the ambition of the targets, lots about scalability, but also that this is complicated stuff, hard stuff, often expensive, and certainly involving not just your own businesses, but collaboration with customers, partners, and indeed with governments. I think I get from you all the sense that COVID is an accelerator, or at least has the opportunity to be an accelerator. And I get from you all that this is an important moment in sustainability, that actually before COVID, a lot of your plans were being drawn up. Something has changed. There's a different culture, there's a different atmosphere around the sustainability topic, and COVID is giving that an extra push. So thank you very much for getting us off to such a good start. Please do stay tuned for more content after the break. Thank you.